Hi, my name is Tara Kachaturoff, and I'm the host of Michigan Entrepreneur, where we feature businesses from startup to stellar. Today, I have as my special guest Brad Mewhort, clinical hypnotherapist and coach. Welcome to the program, Brad.
Thank you, Tara. Great to be here.
And it's great to have you here. In fact, you are the first hypnotherapist that I've actually interviewed, so you get that award.
Wonderful.
All right, so let's dive in. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I spent a decade working in the technology industry, and then about 13 years ago decided that I wanted to do work that was more directly with people and helping people more directly. And circuitously, that led me through coaching and then to become a hypnotherapist as I am today.
Yeah, and that's actually how we first met, which was quite a while ago. So, yeah, and
That's
it's
right.
so great to actually be able to talk to you about this field that you're in and the work that you do with people. So, what actually led you to starting an hypnotherapy practice? I know you had the coaching background, quite extensive. You even have a book. You've done all sorts of things, but why did you go this route into hypnotherapy?
Coaching I see as amazing work. It can bring so much benefit to people. And the benefits of it in many ways do tend to be a little amorphous or very general in a sense. And I wanted to be able to work with people and really help them with things that are very concrete, very specific. uh, Things that people are really actually struggling with, like quitting smoking, managing their weight, sleeping uh, deeply, and things like this. And so it was this really being able to help people with what the problems they're struggling with that led me to hypnotherapy, because I see that hypnotherapy, I've experienced it for myself, and I see in clients just how effective, how direct, and how efficient hypnotherapy can be for such things.
Absolutely, and I can speak to that from personal experience with it myself. Just so we're all on the same page as we go forward in our time together, can you explain exactly what hypnotherapy is and maybe how it's a little different than the coaching?
Certainly. So it would be possible to define hypnotherapy in many different ways. The To be very basic, I could say that hypnotherapy is the use of hypnosis in a therapeutic context. To dig into that just a little bit more, what I would say is that, we have experiences and we learn from those experiences. And we could say that learning, in a sense, is developing new patterns in our brains, how our brains work, uh, develop and change for better or for worse, depending on the experiences that we have. The experiences that we have don't need to be real in the sense that we go through them in the physical world in order to make changes in the brain. In other words, imagined experiences can also be learning experiences, can also change the patterns in our brains, how we function. And so I could say that hypnotherapy is the skillful use of imagination to engage that learning process, to change the patterns in the brain of the way that we function. And so as a hypnotherapist, in a sense, I would say that I'm a skillful guide of people through imagined experiences in order to successfully make the changes in their lives that they want to make.
Oh, I like the way you put that, a skillful guide to help them through their imagined experiences. That's really interesting. I like that because that's exactly what I think it is. It makes perfect sense to me. And I love the fact that you said that you don't have to go through the actual experience to make the
Right.
changes. You can do it through the mind. And that talks a little bit about how malleable and changeable our mind is. Can you comment a little bit about that and the plasticity?
Yeah, it's incredible how plastic our minds are. It's I'm going to say a common myth that our brains become uh, our brains are only really plastic as we're in our childhood, and certainly our brains are more plastic in our childhood, especially our early childhood, and still even as adults I see this all the time, just how plastic our brains really are, just throughout our lives, and the ongoing ability to learn, to change, to develop.
And that's such good news for people who like want to lose weight or want to stop smoking or want to start or stop anything, because there is no lost cause. Anything can be changed because you
Absolutely.
can imagine it, right? You can change it.
That's right.
That's the
That's
title of
right.
another book. All right. So in your hypnotherapy practice, what types of services do you offer, and what areas do you specialize in?
My practice is a fairly generalized hypnotherapy practice, quitting smoking, managing weight, sleeping deeply, anxiety and fears. Those are the major areas. Oh, and pain management. That's another big one.
And how did you, I know some folks just specialize and they only have one area. Why did you choose to go the generalist route versus just specializing in one specific tiny niche?
More than anything, because that's what people come to me for, a variety of issues, and continue to do so. And I want to be able to help people with really what they're struggling with what's challenging them, and help in any way that I can. So combination of just my desire to help people in whatever it is they're struggling with, and the potential of hypnotherapy to do so. I don't think it's necessary as a hypnotherapist to be specialized in one thing and do just one thing. In a sense, my specialty is hypnotherapy, which can be applied in many different ways. And I think that actually I'm more flexible and have um, more possibilities as a hypnotherapist to have the experience working with people coming from a lot of different challenges, from a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, and also once you work on that one issue that they have, often it gives them that bandwidth to actually like look at the rest of their life and see where other things can be improved, because we all don't just have one problem, right? We wish we
Absolutely.
only had one, but it doesn't work that way. So yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
not like you just see them for that one thing, because after that's resolved and then they get to move on to something else. So it's about cleaning up all the different parts of their life.
absolutely. Hypnotherapy is great for that. And sometimes it'll even go in the other direction than what you just described. Sometimes someone wants to quit smoking, let's say, but there's actually perhaps some people use smoking to manage their anxiety. So sometimes it's actually that it's optimal to help them release the anxiety and manage that more effectively. And then it becomes much easier to quit smoking. And on the other hand, it may be that, they quit smoking and it's like, oh, I actually have all of this anxiety that I now want to deal with as well. So it certainly goes in both directions.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that for myself. I've wanted to work on one thing, but it ended up actually working on something completely different, and that healed
Right.
the other thing too. It was like amazing. So
Right.
yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving. So have you noticed that there are any certain types of work that you do that more people are attracted to? Like, do you have like, what's the most popular part of your practice, if you have any, or is it kind of across the board in terms
It's
of,
pretty across the board.
yeah.
Hard to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So in terms of demographics, or, the types of people that you work with, do you have more men, more women, or is it across the board? Do you work with kids at all? Because I know a lot of parents are using hypnotherapy to help their kids with all sorts of issues, from anxiety about tests to just getting along better with their friends and teachers. Who do you work with exactly?
Yeah. So I work with adults and pretty much across the board in terms of adults, men, women, young adults, older adults. But I do just work with adults.
Okay. So when we talk about why people end up at your practice or at a hypnotherapy practice, what usually brings them there? Like, how do they end up arriving there? I didn't really know much about this field till like a couple years ago, but now I know all sorts of things about it. It wasn't even on my constellation of things I know about. But how do people even, how do they get to this point in their life that they arrive here?
Well, unfortunately, for a lot of people, they are arriving at hypnotherapy after they have tried a whole list of other things. Often, hypnotherapy is kind of a last resort or something for helping them to make a change. And I say unfortunately because there's these all these kind of myths and reservations people have about hypnotherapy as a result of many of these myths. And that leads them to, actually try many other things first, whereas hypnotherapy actually, I would, my biased perspective, is much more effective than many other things that people might try. So it would be great if it was actually something that people came to sooner, for their benefit, because often it is what really opens things up for people.
And the great thing about it is it's changing the brain. It's not a conversation. It's a it's
Right.
something that changes you at the core level, as opposed to something that's like, here, do this, and then you stop doing it, and then you go back and revert back to where you were before. So yeah, it's a completely different kind of thing. I wish I had known about it earlier in my life, I'll tell you that. But we're going to take a little bit of a turn, because you brought up a great point about some of the myths that are out there, and I'd like to unpack some of those. I know a lot of people, when they think of the word hypnosis or hypnotherapy or something like that, they start having, like, they have some reservations, because they lack knowledge about it, or they think back to some crazy Hollywood rendition of what they think hypnosis is. Um, can you describe, some of the reservations people have to seeing a hypnotherapist?
Yeah, I think the biggest one by far is the belief that they will lose their free will and be completely under someone else's control when they are hypnotized. And this is mostly not true. For most people, in when they're in hypnosis, they're still very aware of what's happening. They're still very conscious. They still really have their full faculties of choice. Most people experience hypnosis as basically being a relaxed state where they are actively using their imagination. And really, if for most people, if they chose to come out of it at any point, they could do so. Now, to be totally balanced, there is a rare person who, for some reason, which is not really understood, perhaps genetic, who can go into very deep states of hypnosis where they will believe and do almost anything that they're told. But this is very, very, very rare. This is true for a tiny, tiny fraction of the population. So, in a sense, just in case you are one of those extremely rare people, it's important to go to caring, ethical, well-trained hypnotherapist for sure. But and in some sense, these people, as well as actually have a superpower with hypnosis, because the hypnotherapy that they go through is going to be incredibly effective for them when they're so hypnotizable. But it's not necessary to be that hypnotizable in order to get so much benefit from hypnotherapy. And it's so few people who actually go into that type of hypnotic state.
I can't even imagine. I know when I've been in various states, I know exactly what's going on. I know exactly what's being said to me. I'm aware the entire time because I'm awake. I'm not awake. I mean, I am awake, excuse me. That brings me to another myth. A lot of people think like hypnosis is sleeping. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it is not, but can you address that?
Yeah, that certainly is another very common myth, or just generalizing that myth just a little bit, that it's some kind of very special and unusual state. And it's not necessarily something distinct from anything else you've ever experienced. As I mentioned, the most distinct feeling that people have when they're hypnotized is just that they feel relaxed. And the next most common feeling would be some kind of blissfulness. And, just through our day, we go through different states as we transition from sleeping to being awake, and from awake to being asleep. And, we could even say it's a state transition of sorts when we go from resting to exercising, and then come from exercising back to resting. We go through all kinds of states. We're in a different state when we're, at work, when we're working versus when we're relaxing with family at home. And, these are all different mind states that we have. And most people don't experience hypnosis as being really anything all that different from certain other states that they experience. And, sometimes people actually doubt that they were in hypnosis because it just doesn't actually seem like anything that distinct. But, as I often say, well, if you're feeling, really relaxed, you're probably in that hypnotic state. If you're actively using your imagination as I guide you, and you're imagining these things, you are almost definitely in this hypnotic state where changes can take place in your brain so effectively.
I've really found hypnosis is just like being in the zone of anything that I do. It's like when you're watching TV, you're in a zone, you're in a trance, right? Would you agree?
Absolutely. I love how you describe that, being in a zone. That's a great way of describing it. I think that kind of moves away from this myth of of hypnosis being something so distinct and unique.
And can you also speak about kind of the myth that people think hypnosis is something people do to them, but hypnosis is really something you're doing yourself to you. Like it's not, nobody does anything to you. Can you talk about that? Because that's a huge myth.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of in the beginning of a session with a new client, one of the something that we discuss a lot is the role of the client, because some people come in, just as you described, thinking that their role is to be totally passive and just let go. And even worse, some people think, oh well, my role is I'm gonna resist the hypnosis, which honestly is kind of silly, because if someone wants to resist hypnosis, they'll probably succeed and actually get nothing out of the session. So there's nothing impressive, in fact, about resisting hypnosis. If someone wants to make the changes, they're actually an active participant in the session. And as I describe myself as a hypnotherapist, I'm guiding people through skillfully imagining things in ways that enable deep changes to occur in the brain. So the role of the client is very much to be actively involved in the imagination that is the hypnotic process. And then people sometimes wonder, oh, well, do I have to, what kind, do I have a good enough imagination or something like that? And the answer is almost certainly yes. If you can imagine what your front door looks like, or imagine what a loved one looks like, even if you're only picturing that in general, you have more than enough imagination to benefit from hypnosis.
And also, you're not asleep when you're in hypnosis. In fact, you have to stay awake because you have to sit vertical in your chair. Like nobody's like falling asleep here, right?
Exactly right. And different hypnotherapists do that differently. But certainly the way that I work is just exactly as you described, sitting up and not falling asleep.
Right, because it actually doesn't work if you fall asleep. It can't take, your brain actually can't take the things in the way it needs to. So not a
Right.
good thing. So I'd like to know a little bit about what happens in a hypnosis session. So can you kind of just generally give us an overview of what it's like if somebody works with you? So how does that work? What does it look like?
Yeah. So we start off just with a conversation about the change that the client is wanting to make so that I can understand their perspectives and what about the issue is challenging for them. And then we continue the conversation with what hypnosis is, what we're going to do, and quite a bit just about the client's role and how they engage. And then we come to doing the hypnosis part of the session.
And then when you're complete with them, how do you wrap up a session?
Once they're out of the hypnosis, they're kind of back to being alert and awake. We just have a short conversation to um, so that I feel confident that the person is, fully alert and ready to continue with their day, and actually wrap up the session quite shortly after that. I actually don't want to have a lot of conversation about the hypnotic process. I actually want the changes to kind of sink in on different levels rather than having a lot of discussion about them.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing. And I know you said the word awake, and I know you don't mean that in like asleep awake, but we use that word awake. You
Yes.
always are awake. We just sometimes say that word, but nobody's asleep, just to clarify.
Thank you for bringing that distinction in, Tara. Yes, because that is a hypnotherapy term that we wake the person up, and it's not waking them up from being asleep. More accurate would be to say that they are coming out of the state of hypnosis. It's not really waking up at all.
Right, exactly. All right. So I'm glad that we covered some of those myths because those really keep people from taking action and getting something solved so quickly and easily versus, keeping it all in and living with the problem that you don't need to live with.
That's
So
right.
don't listen to the myths and certainly don't pay attention to Hollywood and movies. That is not real life, folks. Okay. So when we talk about your hypnotherapy practice and just like any business, what are some of the biggest challenges you have when it comes to getting the word out about what you do?
I would say the biggest challenge is going back to some of the myths we talked about. Actually, people are afraid of the process, are afraid of what will happen in the session often, because of these myths. And I think the biggest one by far is this concern about being controlled. And a way that I often address this with people, if we take smoking as an example, is to say, well, right now you don't really have control with respect to smoking. Your brain, for whatever reason, is controlled on some kind of daily schedule by needing these cigarettes. You're actually under the control of cigarettes, and we can apply this to other things. Someone who wants to manage their weight we could say, well, you're kind of under control of food in some sense, or under the control of your eating impulses. Or even someone who has trouble sleeping, you're under the control of the insomnia or the waking state of your brain. So I like to talk about hypnotherapy as giving people their choice back, giving people their freedom back. It's not about, ending up under the control of something else. It's actually giving the control back. So that's I think this fear of being under the control is the biggest challenge that I have to overcome in bringing people into hypnotherapy to help them with these things. And that's kind of how I frame the counter side of it, is it's releasing them from control.
Yeah, and the thing is, they always have control. They're in control.
Exactly.
You're just facilitating the process.
Absolutely.
So, what excites you most about being a hypnotherapist and doing the work that you're doing today in your practice?
Two things. One is just I'm fascinated by how the mind works, how it changes, the potential of it, and how we can work with the mind to make changes, to support it in developing so that people can live the lives that they want. I'm fascinated by this. And I love supporting people to live the lives they want to live, to make the changes they want to make.
And I think one of the most important things you said is that age doesn't matter, right?
No,
You can change at any age. There's no
absolutely.
age situation going on here.
That's right.
So, any closing thoughts about building this business in the past couple of years? I mean, where do you see yourself going next with your practice?
Getting the word out there even more, being able to reach more people with, who can benefit from hypnotherapy, and countering some of these myths just so that it becomes one of the first places that people turn when they want to make a change, rather than a last resort as it becomes for many people.
Yes, yes, exactly. So, my final question as we come to the end of our time together is I know you're an entrepreneur for many, many years, and I'd love to know from you, what is your one piece of advice to entrepreneurs?
I'm going to give a piece of advice that's perhaps a little bit unusual in an entrepreneurial context, but it is to clean up the shadows and the things that challenge you in your life, even outside of the professional context. If you challenges in your relationships, if you don't sleep well, if you have, anger management issues or anything like that, take care of those and do the work that you need to clean up those shadows. Not only will it benefit your whole life, but at some point, if you don't clean those up, they're going to creep into your professional life, into your business as well, and deal with those, clean those up in advance.
Well said, because I'll tell you, dealing with entrepreneurs for over 20 years, it's all about that stuff first. It's not the business stuff at all. You are
Right.
so right. Thank you so much, Brad, for being a guest on today's program.
It was wonderful to be here and have this conversation with you, Tara. Thanks so much for having me here.
If you'd like more information about our program, please visit us at michiganentrepreneurtv.com. Please join me again in the future when I interview another enterprising entrepreneur. Until then, wishing you the best of business.